So, hello everyone, and welcome to the SB Games 2020. I'm here with the honor to introduce you Eric Zimmerman. I'll make a brief introduction in Portuguese right now, so to explain the rules of this game on watching this event right now. So, boa tarde a todos. Apresentando aqui o primeiro Keynote do SB Games, uma honra apresentar o Eric Zimmerman. Só explicando para vocês como vai funcionar. O Eric vai apresentar durante 30 minutos, um pouco mais de 30 minutos talvez, a apresentação dele, e vai ter uns 10 a 15 minutos aí para a gente fazer algumas perguntas. Então, lá no OVA, né, quem está inscrito no evento pode fazer as perguntas por lá, a prioridade são as perguntas por lá, e se tiver algum tempo, eu vou dar uma olhada nas perguntas também do pessoal que está no YouTube. So let me introduce Eric now in English again. For those who doesn't know Eric, he's an award-winning game designer who has been inventing play on off computer for more than 25 years. It's also co-founder and chief design officer of Game Lab and game developing company based in New York City. And it's also a professor on the NYU Game Center, the TISC School of the Arts, and it's founder of the Institute of Play, a non-profit that looks for the intersection of games and learning that has opened a public school in New York City based on play as the model of learning. And of course, there's a lot of things in these more than 25 years of history in the game. So let's pass the word to you, because I think everyone is kind of learn what you have to say in this specific moment, that the most important game of world just concluded, and I'm with the right shirt right now, with blue shirt, because we just concluded this most important game with the most messy game design, that is the US election. So Eric, please, the stage is yours, and let's talk.
Great. Pedro, thank you so much. And hey, everybody, thanks for tuning into the talk. I'm really excited to kick off the SB Games conference. Yes, and as Pedro said, the fact that the United States presidential election was just called moments ago is definitely will tie into a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, as you're about to see. The last 2 years, as I've been giving talks, I like to give 30 seconds off topic. This is my 30 seconds off topic. This is a spoon that I carry with myself wherever I go, and it's very light. It's a camping spoon, a titanium spoon. The fact that I carry this means that I never have to use plastic silverware, chopsticks, forks, knives, spoons. And I encourage all of you to think about small changes that you can make to your lifestyle that can, over our lifetime, have a very big impact on the planet. And that's also a little bit relevant to what we're talking about, because I'm going to start up my presentation now. Pedro, you can see my slides?
Yes. Great.
So I'm going to talk about games. The name of the talk is Games Are Not Good for You. And, you know, this is an amazing conference that's about to happen. We're just on the cusp of all of this. If you've looked at the program, all of the things that we can do in games or with games, understand about games and how they work. But right here at the start of the conference, before we dive into all the details of what games can do, I just want to pause for a second and look at games, and specifically how they relate to the world outside of games. I'm going to be offering my own idiosyncratic point of view from my field of game design, and how some of these concerns have manifested in my own work. This is a research conference, so for me as a game designer, me presenting my research means sharing some projects that I've done. So those will be kind of interwoven into what I want to say. Just to give you a sense of who I am, where I come from, Pedro mentioned some of these things, but I was a co-founder with Peter Lee of a company called Game Lab in New York City that did a lot of games over the years. Diner Dash was probably the one we were most known for, but we did a lot of games. I've also worked independently. I worked as the lead designer on a game called Sissy Fight 2000. I work off the computer, making tabletop games. I work with architect Natalie Pozzi, and she and I make large-scale installation projects. As Pedro mentioned, I co-founded the Institute of Play, a nonprofit that looks at the intersection of play and games. I have a scholarly life. These are books that I co-wrote or co-edited with Katie Salen. And I'm also a professor at the NYU Game Center, where we do all kinds of things and have a BFA and an MFA program for people that want to study games as a form of cultural production. So why do I want to talk about games and how they relate to the world? Well, 4 years ago, the country where I am a citizen elected a president. And just moments ago, we just found out that this president was not elected for a second term. But like a lot of people, this was very disturbing for me. And it's played out even worse than we could imagine. I mean, there's so many things that have gone wrong with the United States over the last 4 years, from self-serving corruption and embezzlement to environmental devastation to racist propaganda coming from the leader of the country. I know I'm lingering on this image. It's unpleasant, as it should be. And now we find ourselves. I made this slide a couple days ago as Trump was tweeting about the election count was false and giving press conferences where he was just inventing facts. And meanwhile, in another universe, there were people that were almost drowning in data, analyzing all the minutia, trying to make sense of what was going on with the vote counting, and this is from the front page of the New York Times, and it's amazing that such deep kind of information visualization and systems literacy has become so important for understanding the news, the game, as Pedro said, that we've all been witnessing, especially in this country. But in part, the problem comes from the fact that the systems themselves are deeply broken. And we're going to get more into this in a moment. But first, let's just talk about games for a second. We're here. You're watching me. You're attending this conference because in some way we love games, right? We play them. We study them. We make them. We use them. We abuse them. If we're not their biggest fans, we're the loyal opposition, or maybe the snobs that love to hate them. But it's complicated how games relate to the outside world. To think about that relationship. When I entered the game industry in the early 90s, this was an era of CD-ROMs and the first 3D games, first wave VR. Actually, VR kind of looks the same as it does in this vintage image, now that I think of it. But when I started teaching at NYU at that time, just as an adjunct working in the game industry, I remember I was baffled at first by people's resistance to like pushing back on games. Like, why, like, didn't people realize that video games were this new cultural form that was inventing itself, and it's exciting and amazing? Didn't everybody see their potential? And I remember coming across this contest from Voyager, who was one of the premier publishers of CD-ROMs at the time. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see what it is. The message is, do not enter this contest if you want home shopping encyclopedias and video games to define the information superhighway. I think that was a very trendy term at the time. But look at the judges here at the bottom of the poster. I mean, Art Spiegelman, you know, the Mouse comic book author, Laurie Anderson, William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer, the artist Jenny Holzer, the filmmaker Terry Gilliam. I mean, these were the coolest possible people existing, you know, in the United States at the time. These were the cultural gatekeepers, right, saying, let's keep out games. But in less than a generation, we've gone from that to this, right? This is a Fast Company article from a few years ago, or a more recent article. You know, VR is going to change the world. It's like an emotional roller coaster. And I think that this is a problem. You know, one problem is that we're asking of games things that pardon me. Can you see my slides, Pedro? Hello? Hello?
Hello. Yes, I can see your slide.
Everything is going okay. Okay, I just had a glitch on my end.
Everything's fine. Yes.
Awesome. We're asking of games things that we're not asking of other cultural forms. That they act like a magic wand or silver bullet, that they prove their value by changing the world or making us better or smarter. This is not something that we ask of books or music or cinema. And it's up to us to change the story. All of us now interested in games, making games, researching games, the people that love games and know them best. When we think about games and how they relate to the world, we need broader rubrics for thinking about the interface between games and society as activists and educators and scholars and researchers and designers. Let's not instrumentalize games. Let's not reduce games to their measurable effects. This is like reducing cuisine to nutrition, right? Any chef would take offense at the idea that food just comes down to the nutritional value of what you're eating. In fact, the experience of cuisine is 1,000 things, that the cultural references you make with the dishes that you prepare, the sensual experience of food, the social phenomena of dining, right? But if we think of food and cuisine and all of that, we never want to just reduce it to only the nutritional value. So my point is that how can we think of ways not to reduce and limit the idea of games, but expand it? By the way, the last few screens that I've been showing are from Lumosity, the company that was made famous by selling the idea that you can get smarter by playing games. Whatever did happen to Lumosity, actually, now that I think of it? So I come from a family of art educators. Art education is an interesting discipline because it's also about trying to leverage the positive effects of an aesthetic form, a cultural form of art. But art educators never try and measure information transmission or cognitive skill improvement. They're not, there's no like artification of education, right? They ask deeper questions, richer questions, bigger questions. We're not asking these kinds of questions of games. How do we use them to create knowledge? How do we use them to create ourselves, to enrich our joy and pleasure? And I'm talking about sort of old-fashioned, musty old art education. We want to think about how games connect to the rest of culture and can have some kind of impact. And there's a few models that I'm seeing as people are trying to explore this issue, right? And I want to look at a few of them now. One of them is this idea of games as message. Again, I'm talking about how we as game creators maybe can think about the way that games relate to the outside world. And this seems to make sense, right? Then games can be about something. They can be about serious topics or social issues or educational content. This is from the just released Spider-Man game this week. And there's nothing wrong with this idea. And obviously, I love the idea that games can take on sophisticated cultural issues, in this case, racial politics inside games. But the danger of reducing a game to a message is that it does become just about injecting our players with content, right? Games as efficient conveyors of ideas, lesson plans, or political propaganda, and it's maybe not the best use of games. What is the theory of change when you are saying, I have a message, I want to communicate that message through something that I'm injecting into a game? A danger is I see from something like green architecture. Stefano Boeri, who's an architect known as a champion of green architecture, and this looks like a powerful statement, right? Oh, it's a building in an urban area that's covered with green, and sort of reversing the relationships of the urban and the natural world. But actually, other architects are critical of this approach, that they call it greenwashing, right? In this case, the building is incredibly expensive. It's not really sustainable. There's an army of landscapers that are keeping it watered. The trees are dying. It's totally impractical. And it's obviously just for the very rich people that can kind of experience this building and live there. It looks great, but it becomes like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's an unwitting parody of the thing that it's trying to critique. It becomes a kind of like, an overblown parody of the very environmentalism that it's trying to promote. And it's an example of rampant urbanism from one point of view, a critical point of view, not the cure for it. So those are some of the dangers of games as message, but there's other models too. One that we all know by the name of gamification, and I think there may be some sessions on this later in the conference. Gamification doesn't seem so bad at first glance, right? I mean, if the idea of a simple message is not working, then gamification at least engages with the idea of games as an interactive system, right? Incentivizing players to change their behaviors. Well, what's wrong with this idea of gamification? There's a lot of things wrong with it. Like, I'll just mention one. Every game implies its player, right? Every game builds an implicit model of what it means to be human and propagates that idea into the world. And for me, this is the model of the human being from the point of view of gamification, right? This is sort of a behaviorist lab rat. I just think that this is a severely impoverished notion of what it means to be human, and that some of the methodological problems of gamification is that we become more attached to the extrinsic rewards than we do to the more kind of deeper behaviors happening within the game itself. The whole point of gamification is that it's applying things from games outside of games. It's sort of strip mining points and levels and achievements for usually marketing purposes or other kinds of behavior change purposes. And gamification is really the poster child for instrumentalization of a cultural form. So you can tell I'm not a huge fan of it. But I want to look for new models about how games can relate to the outside world. I want to look outside of games, maybe for forms of culture that have a deeper and richer relationship to the lived experience, human experience, and the world outside. I'm going to look at a few examples of contemporary art and design and image making that help us think about games as an aesthetic form, games as a form of culture. This image is from the photographer Edward Burtnitsky. He makes massive, beautiful photographs of industrial culture. This is from a chip factory in China or here in Southeast Asia, where steel ships are dismantled for scrap. And this again by Burtnitsky, a beautiful red river of industrial waste. This is not artwork with information to convey or a thesis to communicate. It's not simple social issue message propaganda. It utilizes ambiguity and contradiction, and it sort of seduces you with beauty and then makes you question it. This is Edward Burtnitsky talking about how for him his work works as a sort of world that he wants people to enter, right? And they start having reactions to this world. You can see that he's framing his artwork as something that moves sort of from formal beauty to more of a scary image, then to forbidden pleasure, then to political statement, and it's sort of a moral or ethical revelation, that there's a whole journey kind of implicit in the way that he's thinking about, he wants his artwork to function. This is a different kind of visual culture. These are images from a manual used by protesters in Egypt during the 2011 so-called Arab Spring demonstrations and standoff with the army that resulted in democratic reforms. This is visual culture that isn't based on beautiful images and then questioning them or even communicating a message or subtly manipulating behavior. This is a handbook for action. So this is a model about something that you interact with and that can change your behavior, but it's really meant to be a kind of a guidebook for use. It's also so beautiful in so many ways, as clean, efficient design, as utility, as an artifact from an important moment in time, as an expression of people's desire for social change. This is an installation by the American artist Carol Walker with the title A Subtlety. It's a massive sculpture made out of sugar. And there's so many layers to this. This is actually, it's actually appropriating racist stereotypes and making them sort of perversely spectacular. It's taking place, this installation was installed in Brooklyn in the Domino Sugar Factory, and it's very much a commentary on the labor politics of the whole history of the cane sugar industry. So many layers that we don't have time to get into now. This is from art star Ai Weiwei and his photograph triptych dropping a Han Dynasty urn. This is not artwork that just delivers a message or seeks to have a quantifiable outcome on the audience. It's disturbing, ambiguous, contradictory, funny, sad, provocative, all at once. So this model, thinking about games as an aesthetic form, for this audience at an academic conference on games where many of us are researchers and scholars and educators, how and why is this model useful? Well, I want to talk about the relevance of games and how we can sort of connect them to the world. I want to introduce this idea of the ludic century, which is something that I've written about a little bit. The idea that we're living in a time that's defined in some way by games. I want to argue that games are going to be the model for cultural production, media, art, entertainment in the coming century. So it really matters that we figure this out, that we can expand the possibilities for how games can relate to, comment on, impact the rest of culture. Specifically, this is an argument about meaning. The argument I want to make is that games can be an important part of how we think about meaning in design, literacy, and culture. Speaking of meaning, I don't know if you can hear the honking behind me, but I'm in New York City, Manhattan right now, and it is lighting up with people banging pots and honking horns and people yelling in the streets celebrating the election. This is definitely not a city that was in general support of Donald Trump, to put it that way. The ludic century is an argument about history. It's a really, really simple argument. I'm not a historian, so this is pretty basic, but the idea is that the 20th century saw the rise of an industrial age, and that was followed by a sort of information revolution. In the second half of the 20th century, information becomes abstracted into the ones and zeros of digital technology. And the question I want to ask is, what's next? I want to argue that we're living now in a ludic age, a time that we can usefully characterize by way of play and games. And I know this is a grand simplification and not the only way of thinking about the times that we're living in, but it's useful for the argument that I want to make. You know, in the 20th century, for example, the moving image was put at play, right? There's a lot of forms of culture in the 20th century, but if you think about the way that kind of advertising and news happened, personal narratives and kind of epic cultural stories were told, the moving image, film and television, was really perhaps the dominant moving image, right? But in a sense, it was passive. The classic moving image, sitting in a dark theater, huddled around the television, that notion of the moving image in our 21st century has been put at play. The moving image now is more modular, modifiable, participatory. It's, you know, we stream it, we put it in a window, we look at multiple images at once, we comment it on social media, we make fan culture out of it. It's not a linear theater experience where it's just a stream of information. So if the 20th century was dominated by moving image, the 21st century, this ludic century I'm talking about, is, I'm going to say that games, or things like games, are sort of the model for our media, art, entertainment that's particularly modular, customizable, and systemic, and more relevant to understanding the world as it's put together. I want to talk about three concepts that are sort of intertwined with the ludic century: systems and play, and design. And these are both ways of thinking about games, and they're also ways of thinking about literacy, about meaning. And maybe these ideas can help us think beyond our current approaches, and we can sort of mix and remix them in new ways. Let's start with systems of these three categories. So systems are a set of parts that interrelate to form a whole. Game Design 101. You know, like in rock, paper, scissors, the meaning of the game emerges in part from the way that these two elements interact with each other. And systems are very much part of this idea of the ludic century. You know, the ways that we learn and socialize, the ways that we conduct our finances and connect with our governments, the way that we research and learn and work. All of these aspects of our lives, even our romantic lives, are implicated in complex networks of information, right? This is the ludic century idea, that the world, at least in industrialized democracies, is completely enmeshed in and determined by networks of complex information. And games are the cultural form of systems, right? The idea of that games have a special relationship to systems. Now, a building is a system, an advertisement is a system, a song is a system, but games are an ancient form of human culture that's all about pushing and pulling at inputs and outputs to see what happens. Every game is a sort of a laboratory for this kind of meaning, this kind of literacy, understanding how systems work. It's not the only way, but it is one of the best ways. And what I want to argue is that we need new literacies to make sense of our world, that without understanding the parts in the whole, we're simply not literate today. And just as digital technology has given games new relevance in our time, they've given this kind of systems thinking and systems literacy relevance too. Just to take an example from this political moment in the United States, there's a phenomenon called gerrymandering. The idea that districts can be redrawn by the party in power. These are voting districts within a state, like within Massachusetts or New York State. And the party in power can redraw these every 10 years using software and using software that tries to predict voter preferences and turnout really on a block by block, street by street basis. These districts can be strategically redrawn. And it becomes a feedback loop, like in a real-time strategy game, where if you get a little bit ahead, you can then use that power to re-entrench yourself. And so rather than the voters picking the representatives, the government is picking the voters that are going to vote strategically for them. And the majority can re-entrench itself. And what you end up with seems unfair, right? This is just a graphic from the 2012 election in the United States. The Republicans split to the House. They actually had 48% of votes, but they controlled 52% of the House, so that a minority can become the majority based on these poorly designed systems, people not being represented properly, and there's voter disenfranchisement. That also happens along lines of class and race and things like that too. The American system is often a winner-take-all system. That's the ideology embedded in our poorly designed democracy. So it doesn't matter if you're in the 10% minority or 40% minority. In the case of what we were just witnessing, the entire state goes towards in the presidential election towards electoral votes. And this is a classic Eurogamer mechanic. This is El Grande. A regional winner-take-all. So if you look in the foreground of this slide, you see Granada. The red is going to win. So those votes for those blocks, units for green and yellow, I'm sorry, but they're not going to help you with Granada. But in a game like El Grande, there's all kinds of other balancing mechanics that help balance that out. For example, there are scaled rewards for second and third place. So it's not all about just getting first place. Or there's also the fact that what red will get from helping them score in Granada is not the very same power that let them put units there, right? So it actually slows down the snowball effect. Why are there all these interesting balancing mechanics? Because this was designed by a game designer, right? But in our political system, you don't have these. So you have instead a system where someone can lose the popular vote, but win the electoral college vote. And can we really blame politicians and other people for gerrymandering and gaming these systems? Aren't they just playing the game really well? I think so, right? You can't really blame them. They're just being good game players. In other words, it's game-like thinking that's gotten us into this mess. Games are part of the problem, but they're part of the solution too. So let's move on from systems. Let's talk about play, right? Play is, in my mind, very much related to the rules of a game, that we have these structures that are systems, but play are those moments when we're finding kind of the wiggle room. In English, we talk about the fact that there's play in gears, the little bit of wiggle room. There's an existing system, but the play is the moment when that system is perhaps not being completely utilitarian. The little bit of extra movement. It's a free play within a more rigid system. Play are those moments when we are being more spontaneous and creative and improvisational, and maybe working against the rules of the system in some way. In the context of the ludic century, in other words, analytic understanding of systems is not enough. Play is important because systems are fuzzy. Information is put at play. If you think about, for example, we no longer use encyclopedias, we use Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia is a human system, a messy system. It's a system that is constantly negotiating its own rules for improving itself. This is artwork from artist James Bridle called Every Edit. It's a book with every edit made to a single Wikipedia article, the Iraq War, over a period of 5 years. This is another angle on play. Bernie DeKoven, one of my heroes who passed away recently. And he has the idea of a play community, that when we play, we're part of a shared human system, making changes to make that system better for everyone. This idea undermines the authority of the designer of fixed rules systems that we have to live with. I want to talk about playing with the system for a moment. I want to explore one of my recent projects with Natalie Pozzi, the architect, called Waiting Rooms. This is not a game per se, but it's kind of an interactive experience installed in a building. It's a series of dystopian waiting rooms that takes over a whole building. And it was inspired in part by Natalie Pozzi's experience of the US immigration bureaucracy. So it takes over a whole building. We've installed this in museums. Each room is different. You use two economies, coins and tickets, and every room is a little bit different. There are exit fees that you have to pay to move between them, following these lines on the floor, but you never really know where you're going. And every room has different sort of rules that determine how that room works. It's a dystopian bureaucracy without a real purpose. It's a narrative without a plot. The interaction sort of determines what you do. This is a map of some of the rooms and how they interact with each other. It's a very socially emergent system where cheating and collaboration and rule breaking and bending is part of how you play the game. Just to give you a sense of how it works, in one of the rooms, every room has an attendant, and when you come in and sit down, the attendant gives you some rules to follow. And in this case, they say, you can have a seat. When you sit down, the attendant will start giving you pennies, right? And 1 penny per hour. Sorry, 1 penny per minute. And the amazing thing about what happened in this room when people played is that people quickly fill up the seats because so many rooms are sort of about randomness and not knowing. And here you're guaranteed a little penny inside this space. But what ends up happening in the room is that people then started when we present this project in this one particular room inside this 15-room installation, people start doing things like, well, maybe I can sit on someone else's lap and we can both get a penny, because the number of seats that you can sit in is very, very limited. And we see all kinds of wild behavior. In this case, when people thought they could sit on each other's laps, the attendant didn't know what to do. They started giving everyone on the lap pennies. There were quickly like 10 people deep of strangers sitting on each other's laps because everybody wanted to figure out the ways that they could play with the system. As a space of possibility, this project was interesting to us because it was personal. There's a value to systems that give space for individuals to find meaning. Another project where I'm exploring these ideas of systems in play, these are my collaborators, Peter Berry, Colleen Macklin, and John Sharp, is Dear Reader. So if play is playing with structures, Dear Reader is a game that we released recently on Apple Arcade that plays with language and literature. It's a word puzzle game where you are actually playing with the actual text of public domain literature, in this case, Moby Dick, and rearranging the letters and words or lines. There's all different ways to play with it. I like thinking about playing with content the way that a skateboard plays with its context. Dear Reader is a game, but also a process that's applied to literature, right? This is not gamifying literature, just like a skateboard is not gamifying a railing or a stairway. It's playing with it, finding new ways to play with existing structures. This game's available now on Apple Arcade service. So the last of these 3 ways of parsing the ludic century, and I know I'm getting near the end of my talk now, is design. Design connects to the world outside because our world is design. Design reminds us that games and other cultural objects and experiences are constructed objects. It also connects us back to meaning, the way designers create meaning. We create systems, but players actively participate with those systems to generate meaning. And this is true to some extent for all forms of design, but games really encourage and require active participation by their audiences in a way that highlights the ways players participate in the generation of meaning through design, blurring the boundaries through players and designers. And again, phenomena like user-generated content, hacking and modding, tournament cultures, level design communities, and streaming, all of this sort of reminds us of the ways that games can be platforms for blurring the boundaries between the producers and consumers of content. For me, design is it's not just a discipline, it's a point of view, a way of seeing and being in the world that games can help us explore. This is another sneak peek at an unpublished project called Level. It grew out of a collaboration with Tony Pizza and Natalie Pozzi, two designers, and our work with the Child Protective Services in New York City. Just to say briefly, because I know I'm over time, it's a card game that was initially designed for when children in the foster care system are reunited with their families, as an activity of something to do that scales for different age levels and different numbers of people. But it evolved into a deck of cards that you can play a whole bunch of cards with, and it's actually something that's designed to be easily modifiable and encourages kids also to become game designers. So this is a shot of a current prototype and an ongoing playtesting that's happening with that. And it's also very indebted, again, to the work of Bernie DeKoven and the idea that designers can create these temporary play communities. So what's at stake? Coming to the end of my talk now, and seeing the world as designed, not taking the built environment or the media landscape or social and political structures for granted. It brings me back to sort of how I started this talk, right? I wanted to get back to what happened 4 years ago, thinking about all of this. When Donald Trump was elected, what can I do? How can my work fit in? I started working on a project called Gaming the System to respond to that political moment. I didn't want to make a serious game, but instead apply game design thinking to the real world and to turn this relationship inside out. Not a game commenting on or representing the world, but games or game-like thinking as a lens for understanding the world. I have no idea what form that would take. I started collaborating with some institutional partners, developing ideas and running workshops that brought together game designers and journalists. We brainstormed ideas and worked on concepts. This was a concept for sort of a Pokemon Go game that would actually address some of the redistricting ideas and gerrymandering ideas that I talked about. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't like any of these ideas. I think this is a very, the problems with the concepts that we came up with is that we never really escaped from the trap of serious games, what happens at the intersection of games and real world impact. Another year or two passed, but I do have something new to share that nobody's seen before. So I'm world premiering it here. I've been working this summer with Francesca Berardi, a journalist, and Elaine Lopez, a graphic designer. And we've been looking at this idea of democracy as a design problem, the fact that there's so many badly designed problems, not just voting in elections, but also pharmaceutical pricing, gun rights, the way public schools are funded in the United States. So what did we come up with? So anyway, shouldn't make such a big deal out of this. It's just a prototype, but I'm very excited to share it with you. We have started working on a series of guides, self-help guides about horrible systems for horrible people. So these are handbooks for horrible people that want to abuse these badly designed systems. Voter suppression, private prisons, public school privilege. We're inventing a fictional press, sort of an evil press that's dedicated to helping enterprising Americans. This is very early days so far, but we're starting to work on the visual language. We've prototyped the first book, which is a step-by-step guide for making profitable prisons. Here you can see on the left, it's detailing the different kinds of income you can get for different sorts of inmates. And on the right, that's a chart that's actually taken from prison showing how you can inflate prices of items in the commissary that can become an alternate revenue source for your private prison. And there's fun things like word searches. Number 5 says, what is the golden rule you want to remember? How's the maximum number of inmates at the blank possible cost? The answer is minimum possible cost. So that's just a little peek at gaming the system. So where's this all going? Will this project work? I don't know. But exploration and possible failures is part of the design process too. There's a hell of a lot at stake. And it's about fairness and creativity to find new solutions, going beyond our existing ways of thinking about games in the world, trying to engage with culture in new ways, being playful with the systems that shape us, even as we play with them and redesign them, looking outside of games, embracing contradiction, being playfully inappropriate, and to maybe get at something a little bit deeper. Games are part of the problem, but they're part of the solution too. And finally, I want to end with an anecdote. Several years ago, I met Andrew Hiskins, who leads what is called the Learning Services at the State Library of Victoria in Australia. He's doing interesting, innovative work, and he told me in one recent workshop they did, they flipped the script of the usual student-teacher relationship. It was about how students could teach the teachers. He met with children. He was trying to get them to understand how they could better teach the teachers about technology, about their games, about their lives and their needs. And at first, the students had trouble wrapping their heads around this inversion of the usual classroom dynamic. But they eventually took to it, and they started giving recommendations and strategies and got very excited about it. And as Andrew put it, one of the students told him, okay, we understand you now. We think it could be possible to teach the teachers, but first, they really have to want to learn. Thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure. I'll stop my presentation and come back. I'm sorry that went a few minutes over.
I'll make one round of applauses because probably everyone in here is applauding you, but we know all this COVID online thing, this feedback we can make it for you, but it was awesome. There is so many things popping up in my mind, but let me introduce some questions. Well, sure. we need 10 hours more of these reflections and presentations to address all the possible things that you just present to us. But right now, I really, there is some question here that I think it's very interesting. Luca Pacheco asks you a kind of egg and chicken paradox that games are mirrors from society, or the games can model the society in this ludic age. What do you believe about it?
My answer to that question is yes. It's both, right? That culture can both reflect the times that we're in, but they also can transform it. So just to give an example, we talk about play and systems. I like thinking about language and meaning. Sometimes I think about slang. So there can be words that are new words, right? That are often coming from under less privileged parts of society. Like in America, a lot of hip hop culture coming from Black African-American communities. It's slang, and maybe it's inappropriate, and it might even be bad words, but eventually those things in the margins make their way to the center, right? And they transform the whole system. And in fact, through that kind of process, suddenly there's other things at the margin, right? By the time they've transformed the middle, but it's this kind of complex, interesting system. I think that's play. That is play. It's finding the free movement within a more rigid system of proper grammar and proper vocabulary. And games, that's the way I like thinking about games as well. That games slang reflects culture, but then it also ends up transforming culture as well, and is part of a general transformative process. It's a great question.
Awesome. So I'll make a question for myself right now. Well, in fact, I love the idea of gaming the system. We need make game jams around this theme, definitely. But
of redesigning democracy. I honestly think that if you locked a bunch of game designers in a room and gave them some democracy design problems, the results would be amazing. So that yeah.
And that's my question. How we can use game design to fix democracy? You can see a lot of problems in our democracy. You see in US, you see in Brazil, you see all around the democratic world problems in game design of the democracy.
Right.
And how bad persons use these problems on the game design of democracy to explore it and try to hack the democracy for this bad purposes, and what game designers can do to help fixing democracy with their knowledge.
This is the question that I started my talk with. That it's a really big, complicated problem, and I guess it's the conclusion that I came to, or where I am now on this question, is I decided to limit the first step. So at first I was thinking, we'll analyze the systems, we'll come up with solutions, we'll share all the solutions. And I realized it's such a big problem that maybe the first step is just pointing out the problems. So looking at these badly designed systems, and just to give you one example, we had public schools there. In the United States, public schools are funded by the surrounding property taxes. And that's why in a rich suburb, there's lots of income coming from the property taxes. But in a city, maybe a poorer urban, a more working class urban environment, there's not property taxes coming in. People are renters. They don't even own property, right? It's a whole different economy. But then the schools get incredibly different levels of funding per student. I mean, just perversely different. But this is the system. This is how schools are funded. And that is absolutely, a game designer would see that in a second. That's a vicious cycle. It's a snowball. It's rewards the winner, punishes the loser, positive feedback system, whatever you want to call it. That system needs to be redesigned. So we're deploying in this Gaming the System series of evil publications, at least the idea, the sort of a role-playing idea from games. Let's be the villain. What if you actually were celebrating how bad this system was? It's a way of pointing attention to it. And the books themselves are meant to go into detail about how the systems work using systems thinking and game design thinking. But it's still early days. So that I was just showing you some quick mock-ups. We're just beginning research and design, but I'm very excited about them. So I was very happy to share them.
And definitely some months from now, I will want to see more about this project. So
Me too.
let us address one more question. I think we can do it.
Okay.
Let's see. Cynthia Diaz make question that in what sense teaching game design for students in schools can help them to navigate in this century and generate social change? Have you been seeing or developing this kind of experiences?
Yes, thank you so much. That's another great question. So I feel that my my experience as an educator is deeply part of my design practice. I teach because I feel like it makes me a better designer. At the same time, I feel that learning and studying game design is a way of getting at these fundamental literacies. And I'm actually working on another project now that I didn't have time to mention, but it is a compilation of all of the exercises and ways that I teach game design. And it's meant for all kinds of designers and educators, not just game people. If any of you are interested in that, I'm starting to beta test the exercises with other people. So please reach out to me. You can find me on the internet. But I'm looking for educators, especially from outside of games, that are interested in maybe using exercises. And these exercises teach exactly what I'm talking about. It's they teach about being playful, thinking about systems thinking, about design and communication. And I'm hoping that in this case, game design can be a model for teaching some of these literacies and ways of thinking, being critical, and understanding how the parts fit into the whole. That again, I feel they're just so crucial in figuring out these complicated problems that we find ourselves in today.
So if anyone want to contact with you to
Yes.
get this material, in which way we can contact you?
If you go to my website, ericzimmerman.com, there's my email and contact info there. So I look forward to hearing from you. And I also want to say it was very, it's so exciting to talk about these ideas in the context of the political moment that we're stepped through over the last hour. So thank you everybody for being part of that with me. It's really, at least for This American, it's like, hopefully it's a new chapter for our very messed up democracy.
Definitely, and I hope 2 years from now Brazil passed to the same changes. We have in 2 years the same battleground for our democracy.
Okay.
And well, thank you, Eric. It was awesome. I hope in some time in the future, after all this COVID crisis passes, we can bring you here to Brazil to match personally, and definitely have a lot of things to discuss.
I would love that. I would love that.
And it was awesome. We have more than 200 people right now passing through me the idea that you give us an awesome keynote talk. It's an awesome start for this symposium. So thank you. Thank you all of you that are here with us. And we have a lot of activities right now in SBGames. So look to the schedule of this event, and let's see in the next activities.
Yes,
see
good
you.
luck. Good luck with the conference. I can't wait. Thanks.
Bye.